Tonight, we will travel back to medieval Europe, a place where just smiling for too long, talking to yourself, or enjoying a nighttime walk was enough for people to believe you had lost your mind. It sounds ridiculous, but under the flickering candlelight of the Middle Ages, any behavior could become dangerous evidence. So before we open the door to these strange and frightening beliefs, take a moment to hit like and subscribe, not only to support me, but also so you won't miss the surprising ending at the end of the video. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the very last minute. Comment below to tell me where you're watching from and what time it is now. I always find it amazing to see this journey connecting us across different time zones around the world. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's begin our adventure into the normal that became abnormal of the Middle Ages. If you ever thought that life in the Middle Ages was all about fighting, collecting taxes, and eating watery porridge, then congratulations, you've missed one of the villagers' most popular pastimes, reading other people's thoughts without any evidence. In an era where psychological knowledge was the length of a straw, every tiny facial expression, every slightly longer breath, every glance to the sky from fatigue could become evidence, putting you on the local priest's watch list. Just looking slightly different from normal without even being unusual was enough for the whole village to gossip. Let's start with a familiar scenario. You step out of your rotting wooden house, take a deep breath to grab some of the rare oxygen not mixed with the smell of animals, and for just a second, you feel pensive. 1 second. Just 1 second, daring to face your own private thoughts. Instantly, the old neighbor woman eyes you suspiciously, as if you had just cast a spell making the rice prices rise. For them, the mind was not allowed to wander freely. The brain had to be busy remembering debts, complaining about the weather, and worrying whether today Theo the cow would feel like climbing onto the barn roof again. Anything else was a luxury and dangerous. Medieval people believed that the mind was a window to the invisible world, and an open window naturally let the wind in. But instead of wind, they believed that something else would rush in. Spirits, voices, nameless entities always looking for someone too tired, too hungry, or too sad to resist. A man simply sitting alone after work, staring at his shovel as if thinking, I wonder if I should keep digging tomorrow, would immediately be considered to have signs of a branching mind, a flowery way of saying that the brain had started forming its own opinions. And you know what was even scarier to the villagers? A person saying nothing at all. In modern times, silence is normal. But in medieval Europe, prolonged silence was a perfect invitation for rumors. Are you silent? Surely you are hiding something. You don't complain? Clearly you're plotting something illicit. You don't recount your back pain 3 times a day like every man in the world? The supernatural has touched you. Suspicion spread in medieval villages as fast as fire across a thatched roof. 1 minute you're drawing water from the well, the next you're the hot topic in the church meeting. What about children? Unfortunately, they were not exempt from scrutiny. A medieval child was not allowed to be a child. If a boy stood in the field watching a swallow fly across the sky and daydreamed about flying along, adults would not think, oh, what a beautiful imagination. No, they would think the boy is communicating with the wind spirit and immediately send him to the church for a spiritual check. If a girl sat on the ground, scribbling in the dirt and muttering something about a better world, the villagers would take it as evidence that she was being influenced by elves. You see, adults in the Middle Ages took imagination very seriously, meaning they were serious about extinguishing it. But it wasn't only children under watch. The nobility, although better fed and slightly cleaner than peasants, were not safe. A prince sitting by the window thinking about the future of the kingdom could be recorded as showing signs of melancholy. A princess staring at a silver cup out of boredom, physicians would immediately conclude that her mind had drifted into the murky realm, a fancy term that really just meant they didn't know what to do and were pretending they did. Sometimes, not knowing what to do, they would just bring a bucket of cold water and hope the mysterious issue disappeared on its own. Ironically, the people considered suspicious were often the only ones with time and energy to think for themselves. A peasant plowing while calculating whether this year's harvest was enough to trade for a new shirt could be seen as too absorbed. A woman washing clothes while daydreaming about a life without mud-stained skirts would be looked at as if plotting to escape with demons. And if you happen to stare into the void too long, sorry, you've crossed the line into medieval insanity. Imagine this scene. You're walking through a crowded market full of quarrels, clucking chickens, and smells you don't want to identify. Amid the chaos, you accidentally sigh, a deep sigh from the soul, because life is exhausting. Almost instantly, three fishmongers turn their heads simultaneously like amateur fortune tellers. A cloth merchant glances at you suspiciously, and a nearby monk slowly approaches. All because you sighed. A normal human reaction. A sigh could be fatigue, sleepiness, headache, or simply remembering you forgot to lock the door. But to them, it was the moment your mind opened to something they couldn't control. Because in the medieval worldview, mental stability was not a natural state. It was a social construct maintained by prohibition, suspicion, and enough holy water to flood the fields. Villagers did not trust vague things. They trusted oral tales, religious rules, and judgment based on intuition. And so, in a world where people believed laughter could be controlled by demons, tears could be warnings from the beyond, and daydreams could open the gates of hell, just standing still, thinking about what to eat tonight, was enough for the whole village to call an emergency meeting. In a medieval tavern where the flickering light of a few candles struggles against the smell of mildew and the shouting outside, your smile was not a sign of joy. It was an omen. Something no one wanted to see while trying to swallow a drink that tasted like washed out barrel water. A man mid-drink suddenly set down his cup, eyes wide in terror as if he had just seen a demon in a skirt. Another pulled his hood down low, whispering prayers. Because in medieval logic, no one is cheerful without reason, and if you smile without a reason, that reason must surely be frightening. But in truth, what scared them was not your smile. It was the question they asked themselves in their minds. What if he knows something we don't? Because in a world where a plague could wipe out an entire village just from a sneezing mouse, joy was not an emotion. Joy was information. And any information not belonging to the collective was considered a hidden disaster waiting to erupt. Don't think that only laughter or tears could unsettle medieval people. Even focus was dangerous. Imagine sitting there fixing an old pair of shoes or reweaving a basket. You suddenly become too absorbed, your brows slightly furrowed, a tiny moment of concentration in the busy life of a modern human. But in the Middle Ages, furrowed brows meant you were secretly drawing invisible charms. Neighbors would observe you from afar with judgmental eyes, while two merchant wives would gossip whether you were invoking the spirits in the ground. Focus became a dangerous act because the mind was not allowed to wander without the community's supervision. Even sitting still could turn you into a suspect. Not talking, not laughing, not crying, not yawning. Just sitting there like a breathing human. That alone was enough for the whole village to think you were withdrawing from the embrace of God. Medieval people believed that the mind was never quiet. If you were silent, something else was speaking for you. Silence equals possession, a simple formula they firmly believed. If you sat too long, a priest would appear behind you, gentle, like an unlicensed psychologist, and ask if you heard whispers in your head. And even if you answered no, he would record it as if you were lying. Um, but the pinnacle of paranoia had to be walking without a clear purpose. A medieval person never simply strolled. They went to work, fetched water, carried firewood, delivered messages, or went to fight. Leisurely walking was a privilege yet to be invented. So if you walked and looked somewhat relaxed, the villagers would worry. If you walked too fast, they thought you were fleeing from sin. If you walked too slowly, they thought you were trying to avoid God's gaze. If you walked looking at the sky, you were communicating with angels. If you looked at the ground, you were seeking traces of the devil. If you looked at trees, you were searching for entry into the spirit world. In short, you should only look straight ahead, and even that was suspicious. The irony was that those most often paranoid were the ones with the power to diagnose others as unstable. Medieval physicians were trained using an extremely modern method, reading books written by people who had never met real patients. They believed the body contained four humors: black, yellow, white, and luck. If you laughed, they said your yellow humor was heating up. If you cried, your black humor overflowed. If you were silent, your white humor congealed, all leading to the same conclusion: bloodletting was necessary. But it wasn't only the healers who were frightening. Ordinary people were even scarier. They did not understand psychology, biology, or personal boundaries. You closed a door, they opened it. You turned away, they watched. You wanted to be silent, they spoke for you. An average villager could create a conspiracy theory in 30 seconds. Before you could deny it, the rumor had spread to 3 neighboring houses and 2 chickens. And then there was another suspicious behavior: being overly alert. If you looked at everything with bright eyes, they thought you had seen the light from the other world. If you were full of energy, they believed some spirit had empowered you. Sudden vitality was considered a sign of mental instability, because a normal medieval person was always tired, headache-ridden, worn out, and looked like they'd been digging graves all night. Any alertness beyond the norm was a sign of an unstable mind. The peak was when you acted rational. If you tried to explain that you just wanted to breathe a little, think a little, laugh a little, sleep a little more, the villagers panicked even more. Because no one in that era believed people could act for simple reasons. Psychology had not been invented, and calmness was considered highly suspicious. They trusted magic more than logic, signs more than feelings, rumors more than truth. In that world, a frown could get you taken to a priest. A sigh could mark you as a bearer of ill omen. A deep sleep could label you as possessed by a demon. And a smile, something ordinary today, could make you the main character in a small-scale exorcism. So it is no wonder that medieval people were rarely themselves. Every emotion was controlled, every action scrutinized, and every ordinary behavior was assigned the most bizarre explanations their imagination could conjure. That world was not made for tranquility. It was made for suspicion, where every breath could be misunderstood and every tiny human expression could become a doorway into collective fear. In the eyes of medieval people, a peasant sitting and reading a book was not a peaceful image. It was a red alert signal. They did not see a person trying to expand their knowledge. They saw an animal preparing to shed its skin into something entirely different. To them, knowledge did not grow naturally. It came from 2 sources: either from God or from darkness. And since you were not a priest, they assumed you were connected to the latter. The neighbors began to get uneasy. A few pretended to pass by just to see what you were communicating with. They didn't look at you. They looked at the book, as if it might suddenly leap up, bite your neck, and whisper forbidden secrets from the dawn of creation. An old woman would grab a nearby child, pull it inside, and slam the door so hard the frame shook. A man would start whispering, "He's reading." No, not to pray. He's reading for pleasure. That was the moment the whole village froze. Pleasure? From a book? That challenged every natural law they knew. Because medieval joy never came from silence, contemplation, or knowledge. It came from beer, fighting, throwing excrement at enemies, and watching who fell into the mud first. Quiet enjoyment was dangerous behavior, and someone experiencing it through writing? Unacceptable. Immediately, the story spread faster than the plague. He is communicating with alien intellect. He is learning something without permission. There will be consequences. Some claimed you were trying to decipher a secret code. Others said you were practicing magic. But the most dangerous group believed you were learning how to think. And for a community built on routine and fear, a person capable of independent thought was a greater threat than a demon in human form. They would watch you every day, like observing a boiling pot, just turning a page too quickly, and they thought you were activating a spell. If you furrowed your brows, they believed you were solving a cursed puzzle. If you read aloud, they scattered in panic, thinking you were summoning spirits. And if you laughed while reading, congratulations, they would call the priest immediately. Laughter while reading was undeniable proof. You had heard the voice inside the book, and that voice was definitely not human. Then the worst happened. You closed the book. In the modern world, this action is nothing special. But in the Middle Ages, it was when the collective mind of the village went into maximum alert. Because if you had consumed all the knowledge from that book, what would that knowledge do next? Would it lie dormant in your head like a seed waiting to sprout? Or would it transform into a voice urging you to do something strange? The villagers didn't know. and the unknown was always scarier than the feared. A large man approached you, trying to appear calm, but his eyes betrayed his panic. He asked what you were reading. You answered sincerely, "A story." Completely harmless. He flinched as if you had said you were studying how to summon fire rain. "A story," he repeated, his voice choking as if it carried the taste of toxic metal. To medieval people, a story was dangerous. It was an unreal world, imagination, things unseen. And anything unseen was the territory of darkness. You were enjoying a world that didn't exist. You were entering someone else's mind. You were letting yourself depend on thoughts that weren't your own. The entire concept of entertainment literature was as insane to them as swimming in fire. Imagination was the privilege of prophets, saints, and the mentally unstable. An ordinary peasant was not allowed to have their own imagination. That night, many people could not sleep. They whispered about you in the dim candlelight. Some believed you had been seduced by demons. Some feared you would leave home following a lost spirit. Some thought you were hiding something, something that would inevitably erupt one day, perhaps in the middle of their dinner. And all agreed you had become unusual. No one said, "They're jealous because you can read." No. Literacy was not a talent, but a curse. Knowledge was a gateway to places humans were not meant to enter. And you, the unknown peasant with a cloak covered in grass dust, had opened that gate with your own hands. The funny thing was, you did nothing. You didn't sing, dance, or converse with spirits. You were just reading. But in a world where private music was considered enchanting, stepping out at night was a reckless act, and a smile was a sign of mental collapse. Reading a book for entertainment alone was enough to become legend. The next day, children looked at you with new caution. Adults kept their distance. Even the priest gave you a half-suspicious, half-pitying glance. You became the person the whole village didn't know whether to pray for or avoid. Your presence raised a question no one dared speak aloud. What if he finishes reading and begins thinking differently? In the Middle Ages, knowledge did not just disrupt social order. It challenged the community's mental security. People lived in darkness, not because there was no light, but because they were accustomed to it. And anyone stepping out of the darkness, even if only through a page of a book, was seen as someone who had seen too much. In the medieval world, everything you did could be misunderstood in the worst possible way. And the worst here wasn't being given a disapproving look. The worst was that you could be labeled a heretic, expelled from the village, or dragged straight to the local priest, someone who believed that any strange behavior could be a sign of a spiritual attack from dark forces. And the funniest part was that these suspicious behaviors often came from things we today consider completely normal. For example, knowing what is going on around you. If you dared to appear to think too long about a problem, you became a danger. Medieval people believed the brain was something not to be overused, like a strange kind of muscle that, if misused, would start to smoke. Brooding too long? They thought you were plotting something. Appearing more knowledgeable than others? They thought you were hiding a guardian spirit. Asking a question at the wrong time? Good luck, you just stepped halfway into the world of witches and absurd accusations. Just imagine a peasant standing in the middle of the market, watching the bustling crowd and casually wondering, why has the tax doubled this year? In the modern era, that's a reasonable question. But in the Middle Ages, it was a question that could put you on the church's watch list. Medieval people saw curiosity as a trap, because who knew what would happen if you started using reason? You might ask even more dangerous questions like, why do we believe disease comes from spirited air? Or why does that lord never work but lives in a castle? Or worse, why are we afraid of shadows? All such thoughts were considered the first steps toward madness or a rebellion. And sometimes those two things weren't all that different in the eyes of medieval people. But the story didn't stop there. In the Middle Ages, not only intellect, but emotions could get you into trouble. If you were too calm amidst chaos, people would suspect you had hidden powers. If you were too sad, they would think your soul was being torn in two. Too happy? Oh, sorry, no one was supposed to have fun in the Middle Ages. Joy without reason was a clear sign that you had made a pact with someone other than God. Imagine smiling while chopping vegetables in the kitchen. A neighbor walks by, and by that evening, the whole village knows she smiled alone this afternoon, surely speaking with a spirit. Even good health caused trouble. In a world where most people lived with illness, someone naturally healthy made others uneasy. They would wonder, how does she have no back pain? How does he not cough? Could they have magic? And unfortunately, anything involving magic could lead to accusations of witchcraft. And then there were the craziest signs, the things that could turn an ordinary person into a subject of suspicion within seconds. For example, being tidy. A house swept clean? Disaster. A clean house meant you had free time. And free time, in the eyes of medieval people, meant you were either not working enough or hiding a much bigger secret, one that could involve midnight rituals or strange powders unrecognized by others. And if you tried to help others too much, congratulations. You had entered dangerous territory where kindness was considered unusual. Someone who helped excessively was often seen as hiding something or currying favor with demons to receive blessings. So if you shared a meal, assisted someone in need, or cared for an elderly villager, someone would immediately whisper, "Why is she so kind? Who is kind without expecting something in return?" It sounds ridiculous, but in the medieval world, ridiculousness was the standard. Then there were the most dangerous things of all, those who dared to change their habits. A normal person suddenly waking up later, they would think you were possessed. A woman deciding not to wear a headscarf, society's norms instantly fell into chaos. A man changing his dinner choice, horrifying. Clearly, someone had tampered with his mind. Of course, not everything was based on paranoia. Part of this fear came from instability in medieval society. When the world around you was filled with disease, famine, war, and sudden disasters, anything unexplained became a threat. And people, instead of investigating causes, chose the safest route: mutual suspicion. But the saddest part was, this very fear caused medieval people to miss opportunities to see the world more richly. Curious people could have become scholars, observant people could have become physicians, nature lovers could have been the first herbalists, early biologists, but instead they became subjects of rumors, fear, and sometimes punishment. And that is what made the Middle Ages a period both strange, pitiful, and humorous in retrospect. Things we today regard as signs of intelligence, compassion, and progress. In the Middle Ages, they were seen as signals of evil, madness, and moral decay. In the Viking world, a dowry was not merely a set of belongings a bride took with her when leaving home. It functioned as a gentle yet powerful reminder: this is our daughter. She is not a decorative object in your house. And if you treat her poorly, she has enough assets to pack her things, step onto a longship, and row back home at any time. The strange thing was that the Vikings, notorious for raiding villages, were extremely serious about protecting women's property and rights. The dowry thus became an invisible armor, a social shield against failed marriages or husbands who indulged too much in mead and forgot their duties to the family. If the dowry was a guarantee for the bride price, the assets the groom's family had to pay, served as proof that the groom's family was worthy, wealthy, and serious enough to take a woman into their home. In the Viking world, no one wanted to marry their daughter to a man who owned only a scrawny sheep, a wind-blown hut, and a vague promise. The bride price was financial evidence that the groom not only knew how to wield an axe, but also how to take responsibility. It had to be substantial enough to show respect for the bride's family, but practical enough that the groom's family didn't have to sell what remained of their roof. Then there was the morgengifu, the morning gift after the wedding night. It sounds romantic, but for the Vikings, it was a final pledge. I truly value you. This is property in your name alone in case I am killed in battle, fall from the ship in a storm, or eaten by a polar bear. These gifts could be jewelry, gold, land, or even a share of trading ventures. What was special was that the morgengifu belonged entirely to the wife, and the husband had no right to reclaim it. In a violent and risky society, this was the best life insurance a woman could possess. But these arrangements were not just about money. They were political statements. A family paying a high bride price showed status. A family giving a substantial dowry proved they were not weak. When two families were united by marriage, they formed a new network of influence, capable of altering the power structure across a region. A poor marriage could ignite hatred. A wise marriage could lead to warm winters and summers free from conquest. To ensure everything proceeded according to law, the Vikings drafted highly detailed marriage contracts. These were not romantic documents written in verse, but agreements carved on wood, inscribed on leather, or passed orally through people with excellent memories, as if they were living recording devices. The contracts spelled out rights, obligations, assets, and what would happen if the couple was incompatible. If the husband shirked responsibility or treated his wife poorly, she had the right to divorce and take the dowry, morgengifu, and any assets she later generated. Not even modern societies handle this as well. Even when a Viking marriage ended in dissatisfaction, laws still protected women's independence. A clever wife could use her dowry to start a small farm, manage laborers, run trade, and live completely autonomously. Viking society did not see women's independence as a threat, it was a sign of familial strength. A family with capable women was considered fortunate, prosperous, and worthy of alliance. That is why, although the Vikings were regarded as barbaric by many other civilizations, their marriage system was far more sophisticated than contemporary medieval Europe. While other societies controlled women, limited their power, or treated them as property, the Vikings turned marriage into a high level strategic game where both sides had clear rights and benefits. One of the most fascinating aspects was that the Vikings believed a good marriage was one in which both partners were strong. A weak man would drag the family down, an indecisive woman would diminish the family's prestige. Strength was respected, regardless of gender. Thus, they designed a system in which women were not only childbearers, but also property managers, dispute mediators, and keepers of the family's stability. When two families agreed, when the dowry was prepared, when the bride price was paid, and when the morgengifu was confirmed, a Viking marriage officially became a momentous event. Not because of touching ring exchanges or vows under the moonlight, but because it united two powers. It was the moment when the fate, honor, wealth, and power of both families were bound together like forged steel links. And that is what made Viking marriage compelling. It was not a pink fairy tale, but a political pact draped in furs, protected by assets, reinforced by honor, and maintained by the wisdom of both families. In a Viking longhouse, power was not conveyed through shouting or swinging an axe, but through daily decisions, decisions that seemed mundane enough to be overlooked, yet determined the survival of the entire family. When the husband returned from a long, perilous sea voyage reeking of fish, he was merely the bearer of wealth or news of alliances, feuds, or new lands. But the one who turned all of that into a real future was his wife. She was the woman holding the family's iron key, checking the food stores, safeguarding valuables, and deciding whether the household would survive the winter. That position was not granted. It had to be earned through reputation, skill, and intellect. Three things Viking society respected almost as much as physical strength. If, in the wedding ceremony, the sword symbolized the man's responsibility, then when life began, the woman's hand on the key symbolized real control. A man could fight 10 enemies, but if he acted foolishly within the household, he would quickly learn that a woman's power did not come from violence. It came from the ability to manage food, allocate labor, coordinate the seasons, and ensure that the longhouse did not become a chaotic battlefield. If he made mistakes, he would not be struck by an axe. He would starve in January, a far more dreadful death. This division of power made Viking marriage a sophisticated partnership. The husband was responsible for maintaining honor outside the home, conducting raids at the right time and place, protecting the family from enemies, and, if possible, bringing back some silver. But that honor meant nothing if the wife did not manage resources wisely. An empty granary ruined all relationships, whereas a warm longhouse in winter earned praise from relatives for years. That was the soft power of Viking women, a power that required no shouting but commanded respect from all. Interestingly, Viking women also played a crucial role in trade. A man might decide to join a trading expedition to the British Isles, but it was usually his wife who prepared the wool, textiles, and leather goods to sell. When the goods yielded profit, most of the money belonged to the family. That is, the wife had control. Suddenly, financial power was not only in raids, but also in the finesse of a woman's hands. A Viking family with skilled weavers was often wealthier than a family with a famous warrior, and that truth forced warriors to swallow their pride. But what made the Viking family structure truly unique was divorce law. While many medieval civilizations treated women as property, the Vikings considered them partners with strong legal voices. If a husband was unfaithful, lazy, violent, or simply woke up too late too often, the wife could declare divorce in the presence of family and witnesses. No complicated lawsuits, no church permission required. She simply stood up, looked the witnesses in the eyes, and stated her reasons clearly. The power to dissolve a marriage was so strong that Viking women had more rights than 19th century European women. A sweet historical paradox. This made Viking men far more careful. They knew marriage was not a one-way transaction. If they acted irresponsibly, the wife could leave, taking the dowry, Morgengifu, and her own assets. In many cases, the man would also lose his reputation, more valuable than gold. No one wanted to marry a man abandoned by his ex-wife for lack of character. Viking word of mouth was sharper than an axe blade. A single rumor could last 3 generations. This created an interesting balance. Both husband and wife had to work to maintain harmony. No absolute dominance, no absolute submission, only compromises based on family interests and mutual honor. In Viking society, a failed marriage did not just harm two individuals. It could spark conflict between families, destabilize economic ties, or worse, create bloody enmity. Therefore, marriage was a commitment layered with responsibilities beyond any vow spoken later. Yet, responsibility did not come with gloom. Viking marital life also contained warm and humorous moments. Poems even describe couples debating daily matters, dividing chores, or honeymead. The frankness of Viking culture made life vivid and relatable. They did not seek perfection, they sought resilience. A wife capable of managing, a husband who kept his word, and a long house with a steady fire. That was an ideal that many modern civilizations could learn from. And it was within the delicate harmony between these two roles that the Vikings built the strongest communities of the Middle Ages. When the man went afar, the woman was the pillar. When the man returned, his other half was advisor, manager, and keeper of the flame. They did not need a definition of equality. They practiced it in their own way. That was the secret of Viking marital life. Strong, practical, and surprisingly powerful. A handshake between two families, yet a partnership maintained daily by two people who understood exactly what they were fighting for. A longhouse full of fire and a future unbroken by storms. When a Viking divorce was finalized, people often assumed that was the end of the matter. But in Norse society, where honor weighed as heavily as steel, a broken marriage was not simply two people going their separate ways. It was a social aftershock. A tremor rippled across the misty fields through the long, deep houses and resonated with every family involved. Because in Viking culture, whatever happened between husband and wife affected far more people than they realized. A woman after divorce was not regarded as used goods, a common prejudice in many other medieval societies. On the contrary, divorce could make her more valuable, freer, wiser, and richer in experience managing property. Many influential families even actively suggested that their sons marry widows or divorced women because they possessed assets, reputation, and clear family leadership capabilities. This was not a society that treated women as commodities. It was a society that measured them by their real strength. But do not think this made Viking men powerless. On the contrary, a man emerging from divorce faced a social challenge as harsh as any raid he had participated in. He had to prove himself again, show that he could build a family, maintain honor, and correct any mistakes that led to the prior breakdown. A man who failed in marriage did not just lose a wife, he lost standing in the eyes of the community. And in a culture where every gaze scrutinized one's reputation, that was a severe sentence. Yet what distinguished the Vikings was their astonishing practicality. They did not act as Hollywood films often depict, screaming, swinging axes, burning houses. In reality, they saw marriage as an economic and social alliance, and when the alliance no longer served a purpose, they dissolved it in an organized, lawful manner, and sometimes with the style of a high-level chess game. Even in the most tense divorces, both parties had to follow clear rules. Property was divided according to contracts. Children's care responsibilities were assigned based on the stability of each parent. Small rituals, such as announcing the divorce at the front of the house, were not mere formality. They were how society ensured transparency in every decision. No one could claim they were deceived, coerced, or secretly humiliated. Publicity was a shield protecting honor. In large families with extensive land, ships, and laborers, post divorce division could become a delicate battle of law, negotiation, and prestige. A Viking gentleman could lose control of a farm he once led with a single declaration from his wife at the front door. It may seem minor, but in a world where law was revered like divinity, it was a deadly blow. Interestingly, women rarely abused this power. They understood that divorce, even when justified, was a social risk. They used it only when truly necessary, when their safety, honor, or future was threatened. And each time they stood up to leave a marriage, society did not see them as family destroyers. They were viewed as warriors, protecting themselves and their kin with the very legal tools granted to them. But remember one thing: Viking marriage was not just about caution and power. It also had tenderness. Some couples spent their lives together, sharing evenings by the fire, weaving, tending animals, raising children, and recounting past adventures. They did not label it love in the modern sense, but their shared purpose created a deeply bonded relationship. When a man returned from a campaign, the first person he often wanted to see was his wife, the one who knew exactly what he liked, disliked, and feared. And when a Viking wife lost her husband, her grief was shared by the community. Funerals, inheritance, household management, all were handled in a way that protected her from instability. A Viking widow could continue running an entire estate like a true lord. No one could seize that authority from her. No one viewed her as a burden. Broadly speaking, Viking society granted women a status that many European civilizations achieved only after thousands of years. Women had their own property, their own legal contracts, the right to leave a marriage, the right to challenge the honor of anyone who insulted them, and most importantly, they did not bow down. That is what makes the story of Viking marriage so fascinating. It was as fierce as the northern winds, yet as subtle as a woven thread, both a battle of honor and a collaboration between two people entering each other's lives with a clear agreement: share responsibilities, protect one another, and build a family capable of withstanding any storm. So, when we look at the pages of Norse history, we do not only see longships cutting through waves or axe wielding warriors. We see families, alliances built with sweat, discipline, and the astonishing wisdom of both genders. And within these seemingly rough rules, the Vikings created a society where marriage was not a shackle, but a commitment that could be released if either party forgot their responsibilities and honor. In the world of the Medici, danger rarely took the shape of a sword. It arrived in polite greetings, fleeting glances, and smiles as soft as velvet but as sharp as a razor. Anyone entering the Florentine court not only had to learn how to walk, converse, or use the proper knife for each dish, they had to learn how to survive. And that ability did not come from physical strength, but from a more subtle weapon: understanding people. Stories in the palace were never told exactly as they happened. They were altered, arranged, polished to suit the teller's interests. A lavish banquet could be a cover for a secret negotiation. An invitation to share wine could conceal a threat coated in sugar. The clever listened not with ears, but with intuition, with breath, with the way the other person paused mid-sentence to consider whether to smile or tighten the trap. What made the Florentine court particularly dangerous was the blend of art and politics. One could be eliminated not for doing wrong, but for outshining others. A poem too exquisite could spark envy. A painting praised excessively by Lorenzo could make someone a target. Even artists, souls thought to be pure, were not immune to these power spirals. A painter receiving too much favor could be seen as being courted for loyalty. A sculptor refusing a patronage offer could offend the inviter, and in the Medici world, offense was a kind of soft capital punishment. Yet it was this very atmosphere that produced extraordinary people, those who knew how to balance sincerity with calculation, those who could smile gently at someone intending their ruin, then turn away and quietly shift the situation. And among the masters of this art of survival with elegance, women held a particularly brilliant place. Noblewomen in the Medici court were not merely decorative figures behind curtains. They were the delicate threads weaving the political network of the court. They controlled information through gossip, tease, and advice sweet as honey, where no one could tell truth from falsehood. A single suggestion from a noblewoman could elevate or ruin an entire family. And the frightening thing was, they did it with such grace that no one could point to proof. If women were the undercurrents of the court, men were the great ships trying not to sink. Politicians, merchants, generals, all were swept into this game of power. A man could grow wealthy from a timely decision or lose everything because of a harmless rumor. Assets, honor, prestige, all merged into a unique currency, the currency of presence. Who was invited to the important dinner? Who stood close to Lorenzo at the festival? Who was seated at the far end of the table? Every small detail carried meaning, and those who could not read this hidden language quickly became victims of their own naivety. Interestingly, amidst all this sophistication, there was a counterpole, a very human desire: the desire to be admired, the desire to be loved, the desire for power, the desire to see one's family name appear in historical manuscripts. And these desires were often the source of tragedy. A young lady seeking more attention became the talk of the summer. A gentleman attempting to prove his prowess risked overextending alliances. A lady in waiting revealing true feelings in a forbidden romance, and from there the stability of the entire court was shaken. The Medici did not fear overt enemies. They feared secrets. Secrets spoken at the wrong time, relationships they could not control, deals made in the dark without prior notice. A mistimed confession of affection could undo years of political preparation. A glance caught by the wrong person could spark a lasting vendetta. And thus the court became a stage where everyone had to perform. Perform perfectly, perform continuously, perform until they forgot who they truly were. Yet amidst these layers of performance, there were rare moments of authenticity. An artist crying over an unfinished work, a merchant sighing while remembering lost loved ones, a noblewoman looking out a window, letting the sunset touch her face without knowing she had just become dangerously beautiful. These moments, fragile, accidental, were precisely why Florence became the center of the Renaissance. For even in places most besieged by politics, art and truth found a way to endure. Just as the Vikings raised children to survive long winters and enter life with honor, the Medici nurtured the next generation to live in a world where success came from understanding others before understanding oneself. A Medici child learned to read the room, read glances, read silences, skills not in textbooks, but essential for survival. And when those children grew and walked the marble halls of the palazzo, they knew they were not merely entering a home. They were entering a labyrinth of power, where every victory came at a cost, and every failure left a mark. There, history was not written only in ink, it was written in ambition. In the Medici Palace, power never rests. It flows like water, seeping through every corridor, every banquet, and every glance. A timely whisper could elevate an attendant to a coveted position, while a single misstep in speech could plunge him into the abyss of reputation. Survival in this court did not belong to the strongest, but to those who could read every sign, understand the hidden meaning in every glance, smile, or pause. In a world where subtlety determined life and death, analytical skill was the ultimate weapon, and intelligence was not for show, but for survival. Attendants, artists, diplomats, and even young nobles learned to treat everything around them as part of a vast chessboard. Every feast, every ball, every concert had two layers of meaning: the aesthetic layer and the strategic layer. A glance at a lavish tapestry could carry a message about a potential alliance. An overly enthusiastic greeting could be a trap prompting caution. Survival in the Medici court was the art of continuous performance, performing to survive, to gain power, to maintain reputation, and sometimes to satisfy personal desires. Interestingly, even intimacy became a political tool. Secret affairs were not merely emotional games. They were wagers where a gesture, a word, or a gift could shift the balance of power. A lover could be the link connecting two families or the one spreading dangerous rumors. Therefore, couples had to learn to conceal their emotions, even from those closest to them, while maintaining the facade of courtesy, respect, and hypocrisy, a layer the court demanded to endure. The palace was not merely a place for relationships, it was a stage for meticulously planned events like a long game of chess. A lavish banquet with wine, music, and poetry was never just a meal. It was an opportunity to shape alliances, test loyalties, probe the strength of information, and sometimes sow seeds of doubt. Participants had to understand that every action, however small, could become the subject of gossip lasting weeks, even months, directly affecting prospects for advancement or the risk of downfall. While men often asserted power through wealth, prestige, or position, women in the Medici court knew how to use intellect, cunning, and subtle charm to hold crucial power positions. A whisper could guide public opinion. A well-placed smile could diffuse potential conflict. They controlled information, indirectly shaped decisions, and sometimes turned a potential scandal into a tool for strengthening their family's standing. From velvet curtains to marble hallways, Medici women were never seen as mere decorative lights. They were the operators of invisible, yet crucial, power. Marriage in the court was a multi-layered contract. The public layer was ceremony, the private layer was power, and the hidden layer was politics. A bride brought land, dowry, and family prestige. A groom brought political support, commercial connections, and military strength. When emotions arose, they were a seasoning, not the core objective. Love in the court was rarely innocent. It always came with calculated considerations. A wrong step could ruin a long-standing alliance. A poorly timed flirtation could spark conflict. It was this sophistication that turned scandals into legend. Secret affairs, emotional intrigues, and couples daring to love in the shadows created brilliant, dangerous, and dramatic stories. A romance could elevate a noble woman to unprecedented power or destroy a family if handled carelessly. In this world, emotions were never simple, and love was never natural. It was regulated, controlled, and sometimes turned into a political tool. Amid all scheming and plotting, Florence still overflowed with beauty. Frescoes, glittering chandeliers, lush, fragrant gardens created spaces of art and romance, where actions, intrigues, and emotions intertwined. Yet this brilliance concealed the sharp edges of power. A glance could collapse an alliance network, a whisper could spark a public storm, and a misstep could destroy an entire career. Those who survived in the Medici court understood that amidst the splendor, every action was a strategic decision. They learned to balance emotion and politics, power and relationships, ambition and ethics. Anyone who thought the court was only a place to enjoy art, drink wine, and gossip quickly found themselves engulfed in the whirlpool of power. This was a place where intelligence, cunning, courage, and patience were constantly tested, where only the adept could turn ordinary whispers into decisions that shaped history. In the broader picture of Florence, the Medici court resembled a living chessboard, a place where power, ambition, and emotion merged into a tense yet enchanting rhythm. And those who understood this game, who learned to step correctly, smile at the right moment, and keep secrets where needed, became the writers of history, not only through reputation and wealth, but through intellect, subtlety, and invisible power, unseen yet infinitely influential. In the Medici Palace, nothing existed as simply as its outward splendor. Every curtain, every staircase, and every light reflected on the marble floor bore witness to a delicate web of power. Here, romantic relationships were not merely moments of passion, but weapons, levers, and sometimes ticking time bombs. A whisper in the dark, a smile held too long, or a gesture full of implication could change the political landscape of the city. Survival in the Medici court required learning to walk on a razor's edge, where even the smallest mistake could ruin a reputation or even cost a life. Male nobles were often permitted to maintain lovers, but it was a power controlled by the court's unspoken rules. A lover who knew her place could be a tool to attract alliances, stabilize reputation, or soothe political tensions. But if she overstepped, tried to manipulate, or insulted the wife of a powerful man, the situation could quickly become dangerous. A misplaced lover could destroy an entire family, sparking hatred, conflict, and covert assassinations. While men had many options, women were required to adhere to much stricter rules. A noblewoman caught in adultery could face exile, confinement in a convent, or the loss of status, honor, and family privileges. Yet these dangers did not deter many. For love, passion, and loneliness created powerful motivations that, especially when a marriage arranged like a velvet-lined prison constrained them. Women sought affection, understanding, and private moments behind heavy curtains, exchanged secret letters, and sometimes took risks in exchange for a tender gesture or a stolen kiss. Many of these romances later became legendary, recounting love that overcame prejudice, risk, and even politics. Giuliana de' Medici and Simonetta Vespucci were prime examples. Their harmony was immortalized in art, poetry, and the imagination of Florence. Whether they were physically involved was never verified, but in a society where perception mattered more than truth, their story became a symbol of passion and spiritual power. Meanwhile, others, taking greater risks, unknowingly placed themselves in political traps. A noblewoman falling for the son of an opposing family could inadvertently trigger a political crisis. An attendant discovered seducing a powerful figure's acquaintance could vanish from the court's light as if never existing. Ambitious love affairs were even more dangerous. Seduction was calculated to extract secrets, manipulate decisions, or gain influence. In the Medici world, the line between love and espionage was sometimes deadly thin. Yet, ironically, the same society that condemned adultery also indulged it. Scandal was not merely a threat, it was a tool, an opportunity, and sometimes a matter of survival. Rumors were sharpened through smiles and glances, transforming private situations into public performances, while everyone pretended ignorance. Florence thrived on gossip, where secrets spread quickly and powerfully enough to ruin someone before the church bells tolled. A careless word could topple an attendant, ruin a marriage, or shift the balance of power. Rumors often began with minor details: a young lady secretly meeting a noble at dusk, a musician catching exchanged glances at a banquet, or a diplomat overhearing an argument behind a tapestry. Within hours, the story was woven into an exaggerated, dark, and dramatic saga. In the court, scandal was the stage and participants the actors. Political rivals turned rumors into weapons with astonishing precision. A fast-rising noblewoman could be accused of having a secret lover. An attendant close to the prince could be accused of financial misconduct. Here, truth was not mandatory. Value lay in the spread of the rumor and the influence it generated. Even brief messages, awkward smiles, or misunderstood conversations were enough to create storms. The danger lay not only in actions, but in public perception. The Medici espionage system was a masterpiece of the medieval era. Servants, maidens, musicians, perfumers, all could become links in the intelligence network. A sigh, a lingering glance, a minor quarrel was meticulously recorded. Women accompanying noble ladies not only cared for attire, but also quietly reported every action, glance, and word. Information became a weapon stronger than sword or dagger, and knowing what transpired in the palace was sometimes more important than any office or property. Banquets, corridors, and bedrooms were all battlegrounds. Chefs held love letters, grooms heard disputes, and even perfumers became witnesses. Everything was within sight and earshot, and thanks to this espionage network, the court could detect plots, prevent uprisings, and steer power. Figures like Cosimo the Elder and Lorenzo the Magnificent perfected this system, and Catherine de' Medici, learning in Florence, transformed it into the art of subtle espionage: invisible ink, secret letters, and discreet informants weaving throughout the palace. In the Medici court, love, passion, and betrayal always went hand in hand. Letters, smiles, and glances were instruments of power. A romance could save or destroy a family, forge or break alliances, elevate or tarnish reputations. Florence, with its enchanting yet perilous beauty, became the setting for vivid stories where emotion and politics intertwined, and those most perceptive, patient, and understanding of the game wrote history with intelligence, cunning, and invisible power, unseen but decisive in all. In the Medici court, everything had a price, and that value was often measured in information. A letter, a smile, or a fleeting glance could be exchanged cautiously, like currency, between those fully aware of its consequences. Handwritten letters contained not only emotions, but also political secrets, threats, bargaining terms, and sincere confessions. They were instruments of power, yet also ticking time bombs. A careless scribe, a treacherous messenger, or a craftsman opening a seal with a heated metal spoon could turn those lines into disaster. The Renaissance reached the pinnacle of espionage, where even a poorly written sentence could ruin a reputation and shift the balance of power. Privacy was a luxury no one truly possessed. Even locked rooms were symbolic. There was always someone who knew something, Someone was always watching. Someone was always listening. In Florence, secrets flowed like wine, and power belonged to those who held information or knew when to reveal it. A word spoken at the right moment could save a life. A word spoken at the wrong time could destroy an entire family. Betrayal was not merely a personal matter, it was a political catastrophe. Those involved in the Medici court understood that a single misstep could result in dozens of deaths, including innocents, and dismantle long standing alliances. Behind luxurious velvet curtains and brilliant frescoes, fear never left the courtiers. They faced the risk of exile, imprisonment, or a sudden illness, one that baffled doctors and required priests to prepare last rites. Florence had many remedies for scandal and infamy, but the one that sparked the most gossip was poison. From arsenic, blidona, mercury, to powdered gemstones, poisons were hidden in food, drink, and even everyday items like gloves or perfume. A single dose could end a noble's career, honor, or life in an instant. Although modern historians may exaggerate the frequency of poisoning, the fear of it was real. A despised lover, a thwarted rival, or a spouse embarrassed publicly could spark schemes lasting years. But poisoning was not the only tool of revenge. Public humiliation was truly an art form in Florence. Satirical poems, mockery, or even criticism of fashion could spread across the city and destroy a noble's reputation. A betrayed lady could retaliate by allying with the powerful, passing along strategic information, and gradually eroding an enemy's political standing without ever drawing a weapon. Subtle betrayals sometimes created unforeseen events. A métier marrying a rude lover who insulted his wife could trigger gossip that quickly turned into wrath, reshaping alliances, and the woman might vanish from public view overnight. An ambitious attendant caught between two rival factions when discovered deceiving might flee Florence, leaving behind poems, debts, and a wife forced to explain everything to her family. In the Medici court, jealousy was not just an emotion, it was a tool of power, and the beauty, art, and culture of Florence paled before the tension of pride and insecurity. Small, seemingly insignificant actions were meticulously calculated. A declined invitation, a sharp remark at a banquet, or even a carefully staged fainting spell could shock the entire court. A subtle insult could become a feud lasting generations, and sometimes revenge required no violence. A cold smile, a forged letter, or a cleverly orchestrated misunderstanding could topple an enemy without spilling a drop of blood. Florence valued subtlety in revenge. Every scandal, scheme, and secret was a performance with an audience, courtiers and citizens alike watching with keen interest. And despite all dangers, the Medici court did not merely witness reputations fall, it also gave birth to new identities. Those surviving within those frescoed walls understood that wisdom outweighed lineage, timing outweighed truth, and adaptability outweighed loyalty. If a scandal struck you down, Florence taught you how to turn it around, reinvent yourself, and seek new opportunities. Success in the Medici court did not belong to the bravest or loudest, but to the perceptive, those who knew when to speak, when to disappear, and when to transform themselves completely. A lady shamed for adultery could reemerge months later as a devout patroness of the arts, commissioning altars, donating to convents, and reconstructing her image. A previously flawed attendant could be reborn as a scholar, hosting literary and philosophical gatherings instead of feasts and flirtations. Reinvention was survival, and the Medici mastered this art better than anyone. Even love, with all its dangers, could reshape life. Some romances faded due to duty and distance, others persisted quietly, protected by loyal friends and secret chambers. Many enduring loves were immortalized in art, in Botticelli's paintings, Michelangelo's sketches, or in Lorenzo's poetry for his own muse. Passion left its mark everywhere, in sculpture, frescoes, and folded letters bearing trembling fingerprints. The Medici family understood the power of love and scandal better than anyone. Marriages forged alliances, affairs generated rumors, and love inspired art, turning private desire into public masterpieces. Their scandals influenced Florence's politics, from banking loans to decisions on official papers. The Medici did not merely participate in a culture of love and intrigue, they defined it. And the most captivating legacy of the Medici court was its profound humanity. Behind velvet, gold, and political machinations, people still lived by impulses like ours: desire, jealousy, ambition, fear, and tenderness. Florence was magnificent, dangerous, and yet profoundly human. From the moment Claudius was chosen as emperor by the Praetorian Guard, a new chapter in Roman history began. The elite soldiers, originally born to protect the throne, now became the gravitational force shaping the fate of the empire. They were no longer passive instruments. They became the agents of power, controlling the flow of politics from the shadows of the palace to every corner of Rome. Every conversation of officials, every Senate meeting, every step of the emperor was under their watchful eyes and judgment. It was the subtlety of a military force executed with a rare political acumen. The Praetorians learned that true power did not come from the throne alone, but from the ability to create or destroy those who held it. They witnessed generals and senators coming to beg for favors, negotiate, and seek protection, all under the sharp eyes of those who knew everything. A nod from a Praetorian officer could elevate a career or plunge it into the abyss. A whisper could shift alliances, shattering enemies without war. The guard had transformed from the emperor's shield into an invisible hand manipulating the empire. This new status created a potentially dangerous power. The Praetorians, close to the throne, lived in abundance, enjoying privileges and generous pay. But privilege always came with responsibility and arrogance. They began to realize that they were not merely protectors, they were arbiters, the ones who could build and destroy power. They witnessed the emperor in both his strongest and weakest moments, private instances that no other official could see. In those secretive glances, in whispers and plots, they learned to operate power, remembering how every word and action could affect the entire empire. This change occurred slowly but surely. Tiberius, though talented, did not know how to manage the elite force near him. The Praetorians, under the command of Janus, began experimenting with their new strength. Initially, it was subtle actions, threatening senators, controlling information, discreetly eliminating political rivals. But gradually, they realized that power no longer depended on the emperor's permission, but on the ability to act independently. They learned to become the shapers of politics, and every step, every command, was carefully considered to consolidate their influence. This was the moment their power transcended its original role. They were no longer mere protectors, they were creators and destroyers of the court. A Praetorian officer could remove a political enemy even before the emperor issued an order. A Senate meeting could become a stage testing loyalty, where members had to employ all cunning to avoid strict scrutiny. In practice, small decisions such as resource allocation, the promotion of officials, or even a simple reminder could create a domino effect in Roman politics. This power was even subtler in controlling public opinion and image. The Praetorians appeared everywhere, at temples, ceremonies on the streets, and in private meetings, turning them into symbols of order, but also a looming threat to anyone who dared oppose them. They could witness and remember every action, every word, every small moment, turning that information into a political weapon. Rome began to awaken under their gaze, walking more cautiously, speaking more softly, and always glancing over their shoulders. The political power they accumulated did not lie merely in their presence. It lay in their ability to manipulate the flow of power without resorting to direct violence. When they acted, they shaped ideology, alliances, and even family relationships. Through networks of loyalty, they could control the arrangement of power more subtly than any law. Those once considered influential in the palace gradually realized that true power did not reside in titles or the throne, but in the hands of this elite force. From Claudius's selection to the organization of the Castra Praetoria, they proved that their initial role as protectors had transformed into real power. From then on, every political action was influenced by the shadow of these elite soldiers. Rome was no longer a city controlled only by the emperor and the Senate. It had become a playground of power where decisions, schemes, and prestige were shaped by the Praetorians. They learned not only to manipulate, but also to judge when to withdraw, when to step forward, and when to turn everything into a tool of influence. It was a form of power, owned to be both subtle and terrifying. And through each generation, the Praetorian Guard continued to consolidate its image, becoming the force that shaped the fate of the emperor and the empire. They learned to balance privilege and responsibility, strength and subtlety, loyalty and ambition. a doctrine of power no emperor could ignore. Over time, the lesson became clear. Power near the emperor was absolute power. The Praetorians did not merely protect the throne, they learned to create and destroy those thrones. Rome became a grand stage where their swords, judgment, and political influence determined lives, honor, and destiny. A force born to protect had now become a force capable of deciding everything. And the world, from palace to senate, knew that their presence was not merely protection, but a reminder that power could arise from the discipline, loyalty, and the subtle ambition of those who held the fate of an empire in their hands. After the year of the four emperors, Rome faced an unprecedented picture of chaos. Empty palaces, streets full of ashes, and nearly collapsed trust in royal authority painted the scene. In this landscape, the Praetorians proved that they were not merely an army. They were the pivot of the empire, the ones who shaped the emperor's fate and determined the destiny of the entire city. They had learned a lesson Augustus had never predicted. True power did not come solely from the throne, from bloodline, or from the decrees of the Senate. It came from the ability to manipulate those in power and make them dependent on oneself. They had crossed all boundaries of loyalty and authority, proving that the throne could be bought, traded, and even auctioned if the greed was great enough. From Claudius to Nero, from Galba to Vespasian, each emperor had to bow before the guard. In private moments, when the palace doors closed, they saw that the loyalty of the Praetorians was the only thing that could guarantee the safety of the throne. An emperor without them was like a ship without a rudder, easily swept by the storms of politics. The power of the guard did not lie solely in swords or armor, but in their ability to control information, monitor officials, and form a network of loyalty that even the most skilled leaders could not grasp. They observed, calculated, and acted precisely, turning power into a living art where threat, reward, and influence were orchestrated perfectly to achieve their objectives. During this period, the Praetorian strength was not expressed only through violent action. It appeared in subtle decisions, in the ability to apply pressure without drawing a sword. They knew how to make senators, officials, and even emperors question whether their actions were safe. A nod, a reminder, or simply their presence at a closed meeting was enough to change the course of politics. Rome had learned that true power was not only military might or title, it was the ability to turn others into instruments serving one's interests without their awareness. This complexity was further demonstrated during crises of power, where greed, opportunity, and strategy overlapped. When Nero rose, much of his power depended on the cooperation of the Praetorians, yet they were also the limit that kept his madness within manageable bounds. When Burrus, the guard commander, died, restraint disappeared, and the emperor's frenzy became unpredictable. The loyalty of the guard was neither innocent nor unconditional. It could be negotiated, bribed, or redirected towards strategic objectives. They became arbiters of survival, not only of the emperor but of the empire itself. This reached its peak during the year of the four emperors. Galba, thinking that title and military support were enough, was betrayed by the very guard. Otho, his successor, gained power through bribery and agreements, only to collapse when a stronger rival advanced on Rome. Vitellius, in an effort to limit the Praetorians' power, disbanded and punished part of the force, but their deep-rooted strength persisted. When Vespasian entered Rome, the Praetorians switched sides, not out of loyalty or ideals, but by predicting victory and personal benefit. Through these events, it became clear that they had learned a core lesson. Power does not exist to be protected. It exists to be held and controlled. In the whirlpool of chaos, the Praetorians were not just a military force, but political predators. They understood that the throne could be manipulated, even bought or sold, if greed was great enough. No emperor, no matter how clever, could rise without the Praetorians' consent. They became invisible yet formidable enforcers, a mechanism of power capable of shaping and toppling, changing the political landscape without consulting the Senate or generals. From that point, Rome was no longer a city ruled by emperors. It was a city under the indirect yet comprehensive influence of the Praetorians. Their presence and power extended into all social strata. Citizens, seeing the gleaming armor and swords of the Praetorians patrolling the streets, realized that they were not merely protectors. They were a warning, a proof of power both visible and invisible, a force strong enough to shake the throne and determine the city's fate. Every event, from emperor auctions to shifts in military factions, reinforced a hard lesson. The throne was a commodity, and the Praetorians were the ones who set its price. This reshaped Roman politics. Emperors no longer dared to rule confidently at will. They had to calculate every move, weigh every decision, always wary of the Praetorians' greed and power. Emperors, from Claudius to Vespasian, had to learn to appease, reward, and sometimes bow to the guard to maintain the throne and protect their lives. Military power had become the foundation of politics, and the Praetorians were the irreplaceable center of that system. In the long history of Rome, few forces could exert influence as profound and continuous as the Praetorians. They transformed an elite military into a political force, turned loyalty into a tradable commodity, and shaped the fate of emperors like an invisible but steady hand. The years of chaos, coups, throne auctions, and revolving factions all confirmed one truth. Rome was no longer ruled by emperors. It was governed by the Praetorians, the sellers of kings and hunters of power, who turned the throne into their tool and in the process learned that power was the sweetest gift and loyalty only temporary.